just keep adding people if they join us. So welcome everybody to our February Arcadia Book Club discussion of Orbital by Samantha Harvey. So although this was like an eighth of the size, maybe a quarter of the size of our last, I'm a letters person, not a number person, of our last book club book, Middlemarch. I felt like I read this book twice because I literally read it twice. I finished it and I started over again. And just some of the things she wrote, I just had to stop and reread it a few times because I just thought it was so beautiful and wonderful. And I was just blown away. I'm just not sure how she did it. But so I have many notes, but let's get somebody else to chat for a little bit. How about you, James Bonin?
I'll just say good evening, everyone. I hope everybody's happy and that you're staying warm. I am embarrassed to say that I'm in California in Carmel celebrating my 5th wedding anniversary. So yes, thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you, one and all. Please send small gifts to Arcadia Books. But remember, the 5th anniversary is wood, so send something wooden.
First man.
Yeah, although I could, if I had my acting performances from the 70s on videotape, there'd be a lot of examples of me being wooden, but I won't. Thank God those don't exist. So, all right, I'm just going to say I got a text from my friend Robert Petrick, who did the map of the characters in Middlemarch last month, and who did, as you remember, design the Arcadia Books logo, which you can see on this Yeti cup. How in the world is there an Arcadia Books logo on this Yeti cup? Perhaps in the spring you'll be able to get your own Yeti cup with an Arcadia Books logo on it. We never know. We got to find a way to get them done cheaply. But he said, I'll just read his text. Because he can't come tonight because he's for the second time in a class that's reading Ulysses. I mean, really, I'd rather have my arm cut off than try to read Ulysses again. No, wait a minute. That was said incorrectly. That implies that I've read all of Ulysses, which I've never done. I've failed about 25 times. He said, the first 5 sentences of the book comprise the most beautiful opening I can ever remember reading. Parentheses, never mind that I have an unreliable memory. But there are moments in the book that are like that, where that's what Nancy just said, where you just kind of stop and you go, okay, I have to go back and appreciate that again. And I do think that there's been some critical pushback about how beautiful the book is, or how the writing works. And there's another pushback that I want to get to later. But I have a very, very, very favorite sequence in the book that actually it's 2 parts of the book that are connected. And we'll talk about it at some point in the hour. First, when I wanted to lure Robert into reading Orbital, I read him these 2 sections of the book out loud over the phone. And when I finished, he just said, I'm ordering this right now. But those 2 sections to me are, even if the rest of the book was absolute crap, those 2 sections will live in my brain for the rest of my life, because it's so much about seeing and noticing. And there's just these little treasures in the book that I really admire. And it's very unlike her other books, which was also really interesting to me. Okay, that's all I'm going to say for now. But so comments or somebody can start out and say something like, in it did take me a little while to try to figure out, okay, wait a minute, how can they have one day in their life and there's 16 sunrises and sunsets, you know? I kind of sort of sat in the room during most science classes, but my mind was other places. So, but I think I finally figured it out. I mean, I know I figured it out, but I had to puzzle for a while about how is that possible? Okay. Comments, thoughts?
Well, I could start. I have technical questions about, okay, they're 250 miles above the Earth's surface. So it's kind of like, how far is it? It seems like they can see a lot of detail of geographic features. It's like, okay, so that's my one kind of question. Then my other question is, what powers this space station? That it's going, what, 17,500 miles, what, per hour or whatever it was. So what powers it? They talk about their daily life, but it's like, who's keeping the power going on this? And what is that? What is the fuel? What is the engine? So these are, like I say, technical questions, but as I read it, I kind of kept coming back to that, like, okay. And again, obviously they were seeing, detail. They could make out islands, continent, they knew where they were. So anyway, I'm just throwing that out there. I guess that's what I got to say right now.
There's an answer. I see a hand waving who's going to have an answer, and it's going to be better
The aerospace engineer is going to weigh in.
I'm an
All right,
aerospace
I love it.
engineer. Hi.
Good.
What powers this thing? Gravity powers it. It has rocket engines on it to maintain its orbit, but they don't make it go around the Earth. Gravity does. So if you think of Earth, this round thing, and if you got up in a mountain high enough and you shot a cannon, the ball would just go some distance and fall. And if you were higher up and you shot the same cannon, it would still go around and fall. Okay? You with me so far? Okay, gravity makes that happen. Well, the space station is high enough and going fast enough, it's just falling all the way around the Earth. And the Earth curvature always is ahead of it, so it just keeps falling and it never hits Earth. So, sort of like perpetual motion, kinda.
And that is an example, a precise example of why I was only sitting in science class, because that's really beautifully done. But I would have taken me a month to go, what? That's impossible. Well, I just assumed
So
there
you're
were people.
saying that it's escaped Earth's gravity.
In a way it did. It's always in the gravitational field, but like I said, it's just falling. And it's just the Earth curvature falls in front of it and it's just falling around it. It just never happens to hit the Earth.
So it stays at the same relative distance.
Stays in orbit.
It stays in the same relative distance. They can change it a little bit. Eventually, I don't know how many hundreds of years, it will fall to Earth, because even at that altitude, 100 miles up or 200 miles up, there's enough air molecules, even though they're incredibly far apart, that would eventually, over, like I said, 100 or some odd years, slow it down. It's big enough to be, and eventually would fall to Earth. So what goes up does come down.
Isn't there a plan? That I love that. See that? That's the best thing I've heard in like 5 years. But isn't there a plan to do an enormous space station?
Possibly.
I heard that they've been planning one 5 times or something the size of.
Yeah, I've not heard about that. Yeah, even though I'm an aerospace guy, I don't keep up with that all that much. But yeah,
Wow.
I guess it wouldn't surprise me, but it'd be awful expensive.
Yeah, yeah, and God.
Yeah.
Well,
There is one section in the book where they talk about the falling, like that they're in a constant state of free fall, and that's why they experience like the sensation of weightlessness. It's not the lack of gravity because they're not far enough away from Earth for that to really be the factor. It's that they're in a constant state of free fall and how much they're rotating in relation to the Earth.
Yeah, that's why they're weightless in a sense. Yeah.
I have a brief aside because when I was working in a steel plant the summer that man walked on the moon the first time, and there was a guy that I worked with who was illiterate and in his 40s. I was, 21, long-haired college punk, and he pulled me aside at that next morning, and he said, "I don't want anybody else to hear what I'm going to ask," but he said, "Do we live on the Earth or inside it?" And I said, "We live inside it. We live on top of it, Jimmy. We live on the Earth." He said, "Well, why don't we fall off?" And I just thought, oh my God, I have to try to explain gravity. And all I could think of to do was, I picked up just a random piece of steel that was sitting by our lunch boxes, and I just held it up and I said, "Watch what that does," and it fell down. And I said, there's an unseen hand kind of holding you on the Earth, and that allows you to. It's called gravity, but that's all I can do. I can't tell you any more than that. But the same thing that made the steel fall keeps you on the Earth. And he said, "Wow, okay." But it was an amazing moment. I mean, I've never forgotten that. Just this question was so great. Oh, man. Okay, next.
All right. Well, thanks, Tom. Glad you were here.
Yeah.
We're always glad you're here, but this was extra. So I don't want to put you on the spot, John Heasley, but what do you have to say?
Is he muted? Yeah.
Yeah, I'm muted. I'm unmuted now. I loved the story. I read it around Christmas time, and I think I had the experience of just reading it all in one go in one day, which really fit the novel. And I had read a lot about the International Space Station, and I go outside a lot to watch it passing overhead as this little bright dot up in the sky. But what I loved about this novel was just how much it brought home what it's like to live there. And I'm hearing the other questions, which, well, how does it stay in orbit? What's it like? How does it do the 16 sunrises? And yeah, we struggle with that because it is unimaginable to us what it's like to live in space. But there's life in the 21st century that people have been living on the International Space Station for 20 years now. That I think the year 2000 was the last time all the humans were together on Earth. Ever since 2000, there's always been a few of us living on the International Space Station. And it happens, and I don't think our minds have quite caught up with that yet.
John is our local astronomy expert, so just wanted him to weigh in a little bit.
Does anybody know anybody who's been on the space station? Yeah. Gosh, amazing.
Yeah, it's.
I watched the last Apollo moonshot blast off down in Florida, Apollo 17.
Oh, really?
Yeah, that was an amazing thing. Now, I found the book to be an odd novel because there wasn't any build-up to a emergency or a crisis, the way all novels have, like a climax thing. It was just describing these people's jobs for a whole 24 hours. They happened to have, their office happened to have an astounding view, but it was just their job. And some of them even reflected on that. It's like, here I am, an astronaut, and I'm up here crafting this thing. And, we go, if you add up the miles, 9 months in orbit, it's whatever she said, how many millions of miles it is, but we don't go anywhere. And I found that interesting, and it'd be like me writing about a whole day at my work at American Family. I logged in at 8:05 and did some internet email, I mean, it just, people were doing experiments and looking out the window at the typhoon, and it was just an odd novel, but I totally enjoyed it because it told me a number of things. For one, we are not spacefaring people, in spite of the fact that we travel in space, because these people have to exercise for 2 hours a day, and they've got to watch their heart and their blood content and even their brains and all that all get affected. And, that just, to me, that's limiting.
Yeah, that was the other critical response that I alluded to earlier, was that, yeah, some people did complain about the fact, some critics, when they wrote about it, said, it's like waiting for Godot. I mean, nothing happens. It's yeah, Allison, yeah.
I thought it was really, I thought it was, I mean, for a book that's set so far out in space, I thought it was a very interior book in many ways. It was very meditative. There were aspects of it that reminded me of Virginia Woolf, the sort of lyrical interior musing. I thought the descriptions of looking down on the planet itself were absolutely amazing. I mean, I read a few of them aloud to myself. I mean, I have to say it's a book that I wanted to love, passionately. I wanted very much to just love this book. I was like, this is an Allison book. It's so poetic. It's so lyrical. And I didn't love it. And I've had an ongoing quarrel with myself about it, because I think parts of it are just astonishingly beautiful. I like the meditative aspect of it. So I'm trying to figure out why I don't love it. And I mean, far be it from me to want, a traditional plot, but I think that's what I missed in it. And I'm irritated with myself that I miss it. Because I think it is a gorgeously written book.
Well, and a
So,
lot of people over the years, because of the way she writes, a lot of people have compared her to Virginia Woolf.
mhm.
And a
I'm
lot
not
of folks
surprised. Yeah.
talk about this book as being a kind of her way of thinking of that very complicated Virginia Woolf novel, The Waves, where Virginia Woolf takes 6 characters and really thinks of them as sort of one character. Yeah, so but I know it is funny, because when it ends, you think, wow, nothing, nothing dramatic. And actually the things that could have been dramatic just are never brought up again. I mean, the Russian cosmonaut discovering the lump on his neck,
Mhm.
and the fact that he chooses not to tell anybody else and hopes that it won't be serious, because he knows if he's brought down, 2 of the others will have to come with him. And so those were those little moments of humanity that I really thought were very touching. But it was just presented, and then the day went on, just like, and it wasn't ever mentioned again. Yeah, it's none. Go ahead.
It's interesting that it's compared. I mean, because when I think of The Waves, I mean, that was a book I was totally with that book every time, and I wasn't totally with this book. I think the book made me feel, I mean, I'm not a space person, despite living with this guy. And the book made me feel enormously lonely and small, and like, wow, this is really not something that I would want to do or feel comfortable doing. I want to stay down here on terra firma. So in that sense, it's very effective. It's sort of an uncanny kind of experience,
Yeah.
traveling with them.
Did anybody read the book and wish, oh gosh, I wish I could have been an astronaut? That would have been really fascinating.
I wished I could be up there for a couple orbits just to watch and see the beauty of the planet, but no, I wouldn't want to be there 9 months. No.
Yeah. Diane, are you saying that you wanted to be, or are you just saying,
No, when I was a child, I wanted to be an astronaut.
really? Wow.
And well, you know me well enough to know I'm a huge Star Trek fan. And
Right.
so when I think of going to space, of course, I think of the Enterprise, which is like a great big hotel or something. So
Yeah.
reading this was just so interesting because you realize that we're not at the Enterprise. They're in this very cramped space and very, I mean, I could not do this. I think I could do the Enterprise. I could not do this. The cramped space, the everything they have to do, everything they have to deal with, the exercising 2 hours a day, and yet their muscles are still deteriorating. We're just not at a point yet where this is a comfortable thing to do. But if I were a lot younger and there was going to be in 100 years from now, there was going to be a station on the moon, I'd go in a heartbeat.
Yeah, me too.
But it was funny. I just loved it. And I especially loved Orbit 7 when she does the spacewalk, when the two of them, I think it's Nell and Pietro, do the spacewalk. And, it's like 4 pages of her description of being out there and just floating free, with a tether, obviously, but just her description of it was so stunningly beautiful that, I just loved the book. And in one of those weird coincidental things, I was at the theater today and I saw Silent Sky, which is about saw Silent Sky, about the astronomer Henrietta Leavitt, who was the first person to figure out how we could measure distance to the stars. And so it was just kind of a whole confluence of space stuff today.
But just remember, Diane, that you may be cramped on the space station, and you may have more room on the Enterprise, but at the space station, you don't have to deal with William Shatner.
Well, no, I'm more of a Next Gen fan. Jean-Luc Picard.
Oh, all right. Okay, well, that's different. All right. Okay. Yes. Oh, yeah, Al.
Oh, okay. I was going to say I almost stumbled out of the gate. I right at the gate when I started this book, because I got to the second sentence and it says sometime they dream the same dream of fractals in space, blue spheres. And I thought, okay, what's the perspective? Who's writing this? I mean, are we another George Eliot situation where a godlike creature is writing and knows all, not only what they're thinking, but these people at the same time, he manages to catch the same dream. So, okay, I don't know what that's about. So I read that paragraph over a couple of times. And then I got in farther and she does the same thing with the painting, the Spanish painting. And who's the painter? What is this all about? Are we looking at the king and queen? Are we looking at the princess? Who's looking? The king and queen, or are we looking? Or is the painter looking? And I thought, what beautiful questions. And more to the point, I think the whole book to me aligns so closely with the way I perceive my own life at age 75. Like we're out in the middle of nothing, surrounded by nothing. And in the whole scheme of things, it means nothing. But still, we live pretty meaningful lives. We bring it to ourselves. And I thought you did a great job of bringing all that stuff together. And I never did figure out the perspective. I guess it has to be almost a godlike perspective. But I liked the book. I'm glad nothing happened. It was sort of like the universe. We don't live long enough. We're only here for, 100 years if we're lucky, and nothing is going to happen most of the time. Then she goes on and say, well, the space station's going to blow up and it's going to sink, in 20 years or whenever that crack gets big enough to blow it up. Everything passes. And in the end, the whole universe is going to collapse. I mean, if you go on trillions of years, the earth is going to be swallowed by the sun and all that kind of stuff. And I thought, this is really close to what my own conclusions about things are. And then she brings it back to what life meaning really is. So that's what I liked about it. Oh, the other thing I liked is the orbits. It's the most interesting chapter heading. And then you go back and you look at that little chart at the beginning, and you can follow the orbit and where she is on the planet, and you can, chapter 7, well, you look at the 7th orbit and you can tell what she's going to be talking about and where the space station is going to be over. I thought that was a hell of a clever thing to do. So
I agree.
yeah.
Wow.
I just want to say some following what you said, Al, that they were like, where did one end and the other begin kind of thing. In reading, there was no quotes on their dialogue, I noticed, and that their sentence, when they were talking to each other, the sentences just ran together. And I had to kind of reread some, say, okay, they're talking to each other, and this person's saying this thing, and then the next person's saying, responding. And that was like throughout the book. And of course, obviously, it was, I think, obviously done on purpose to show how their lives were enmeshed with each other, or that's what I got out of it. But anyway, I that was throughout the book, no quotes on dialogue.
Oh, Al just disappeared. Al, oh, there he is.
Got my book.
Yeah, because the thing that I alluded to before, it was the one that you just talked about, Al, is the 2 sections about the painting. I just think the way that she lays in that stuff at the beginning, it's almost like, it's as well constructed as 2 moments in a complicated Tom Stoppard play, where he'll just trust that you're going to be right with it when he goes back, and Pietro sees the postcard floating in the air, and at night, and says, "What's that?" And then they go into it's just it's just incredible, I think. He says, Pietro says, "Did someone send you a postcard?" Oh, first of all, that painting, there's a book that Jonathan Miller, the great director and comic writer, wrote about reflection in art. It's called On Reflection. And that painting, Las Meninas, he discussed it for page after page because of the way reflection works in that painting. And you should try and track that little section of that book down to read, because it's really, really fast. He's a neurologist too, Jonathan Miller. Well, he's dead now, but so he really had an unusual take. But let me just read this, because it's just so, I just think it's just takes your breath away. So Pietro says, "Did someone send you a postcard?" Coming to the doorway of Sean's quarters and nodding at Las Meninas that's in free drift. "My wife, 15 years ago," he says. Pietro nods, and Sean nips the postcard from its drift and hands it to him. "Read the back," Sean says. "Oh, I wouldn't. No, go ahead." "What is the subject of the painting?" His wife had written on the postcard's reverse. "Who is looking at whom? The painter at the king and queen, the king and queen at themselves in a mirror, the viewer at the king and queen in the mirror, the viewer at the painter at the viewer at the princess, the viewer at the ladies in waiting. Welcome to the labyrinth of mirrors that is human life." And that's, zing. And then Pietro says, "Is your wife always so obsessed with petty small talk?" And Sean replies, "I'm telling you, it's relentless." Pietro stares for a while at the painting and a while longer, and then says, "It's the dog." "Pardon?" "To answer your wife's question, the subject of the painting is the dog." Sean looks then, when Pietro hands back the postcard, reaches across to squeeze the bony dome of Sean's shoulder before diving away, at the dog in the foreground. He'd never given it a second glance, but now he can't look at anything else. It has its eyes closed. In a painting that's all about looking and seeing, it's the only living thing in the scene that isn't looking anywhere, at anyone or anything. He sees now how large and handsome it is and how prominent. And though it's dozing there, there's something slumped. There's nothing slumped or dumb in that doze. Its paws are outstretched, its head erect and proud. This can't be coincidental, he thinks. It's in so orchestrated and symbolic a scene. And it suddenly seems that Pietro is right, that he's understood the painting, or that his comment has made Sean see a different painting altogether to the one he'd seen before. Now he doesn't see a painter or princess or dwarf or monarch. He sees a portrait of a dog, an animal surrounded by the strangeness of humans, all their odd cuffs and ruffles and silks and posturing, the mirrors and angles and viewpoints, all the ways they've tried not to be animals, and how comical this is when he looks at it now, and how the dog is the only thing in the painting that isn't slightly laughable or trapped within a matrix of vanities. The only thing in the painting that could be called vaguely free. It's just unbearably beautiful. The only thing in the painting that could be called vaguely free. And the rest of us are trapped within our each and individual matrix of vanities. It's just, and it just comes out of nowhere. I mean, and that's what I loved about it, was, there's that long 2-page setup on pages 6 and 7 in my version, that where it's really about Sean being bored but that the wife, or who will be his wife, notices his boredom and uses it as a connector. It's just such good storytelling. So I apologize for that long reading, but I mean, I could read that out loud once a week the rest of my life. It just really knocks me over. Okay.
What page was that on, James?
Well, I have the English
Oh.
English version,
Oh.
but the first, I mean, there's 2 pages right at the beginning, which is in my version is 6 and 7, but it might be 9 and 10 in yours. And then it's at the end, what follows it, the thing I just read, it's followed by Orbit 11. So the page and a quarter that I just read is at the end of, I think maybe Orbit 10 part 2 or something. No, just Orbit 10.
Yeah, I just found it. I got it. I was not able, couldn't put my finger on it. Thank you.
Yeah, okay. Thoughts, comments? Larry?
Okay, I've been waiting to be the contrarian tonight, but I'm going to preface my comments by saying when I was 13, 2001: A Space Odyssey had a profound effect on my life. I'm very interested in this topic. I was excited to read the book, but I found this a much more difficult book to read than Middlemarch. Middlemarch, I sailed through once I got through the initial part, but this book, I struggled every time I picked it up. And I love Virginia Woolf. I love Waiting for Godot, but this is the leader of my least favorite books of the year because literature is subjective. The language didn't work for me. I kept waiting to know some of the characters better. I felt like I never got to know any of the characters well enough to like or dislike them. The passage you read, James, was nice, but I just felt like there was no there there. I felt I mean, I'm fascinated by astronauts in space. I struggle to find things to underline. I will say my favorite quote in the book was pick a single creature on this earth and its story will be the Earth's story, he suddenly thinks it can tell you everything, that one creature, the whole history of the world, the whole likely future of the world. If there was more stuff like that, which I found that I thought was a brilliant thought, but I kept waiting. I can live with nothing special happening if I feel like I learned a new perspective. I mean, I used to have a picture of the Earth from space in my classroom because the new telescope is incredible, but I was waiting for more conflicts with the Russian and personal lives, and I guess I'll still be waiting. I will conclude, James, and say, when I went to UW in the 70s, I had an incredible comparative lit professor named Hall. We read Ulysses as a class. It was one of the greatest experiences. I took another comp lit class so I could read it a second time. I think Ulysses has the best use of the word yes. But in conclusion, now did Diane go away? Because I wanted to know, she said she saw a movie of Silent Sky because I saw a play of it.
No, she was talking about the play. She was talking about the play.
Oh, okay, because the play Waukesha Civic Theater did, and it's one of the most brilliant plays I've ever seen. So
I don't know what you did to her, Larry, but she was like frozen in complete shock for quite a while.
I thought that was a reaction to what I was saying.
Yeah.
No, she's trying to come back.
Yeah, I think it was when you said it was.
And
Larry,
Larry, you're not alone. That's another thing that critics talked about, was that they
Yeah.
there wasn't enough character development.
Yeah, I think Caitlin wants to respond.
Caitlin's got
Okay.
Larry, I'm with you. I didn't dislike it as much as you did, but I am more on the end that Allison talked about, where I wanted to love it a lot more than I did. I thought that there were parts that were really beautiful. And I think that the idea of the novel, of the structure of the orbits, I loved the map at the beginning. But I think I either wanted it to be more condensed, so it was really just a bite-size, novella kind of, but I just felt like I couldn't quite get a purchase on anything as I read it. So again, there were like really beautiful moments. My favorite line was like in the very beginning, "The Milky Way is a smoking trail of gunpowder shot through a satin sky." Like, just the descriptors were lovely, but I just wanted more depth with the characters, and part of it was because of the structure, because it's like this orbit and you're just getting glimpses and you're never going to really stop at them for too long. Like, I get the idea of that, but I think that's what kept me from really liking it more. And I did think that, I don't know, the structure of the orbits and knowing that it was just going to be the one day and you're following the orbits was a neat idea, but I also found it kind of like it limited what she could do in some ways, because we had to just keep moving and keep moving and keep moving to kind of fulfill this thing. So as soon as I got that pattern after like the second chapter, I was like, oh, okay, I know what this is going to be. And so that felt a little of a letdown in some ways for me. I also wonder, a question for the group, I feel like if I read it in one sitting, I would have liked it more, but I put it down and picked it up a lot. And so that, I think, might have been part of it.
Adele?
Yeah. Okay.
Well, my
Sorry.
I didn't, sorry, Barbara. I thought that the main character of the book was Earth. And it was the importance of the orbits. And there's a description, I've marked it, the description of the planet, and that the astronauts represented just us, that our lives are complicated and they're small, but it was the Earth that was center of their exploration and of their awe, and that it was just they had beautiful sections on describing the aurora borealis. They had wonderful script descriptions of how the planet just the continents really do fit together. I mean, and the oceans, and I really liked the description of the typhoon, and they knew what from above what it was looking like. So yeah, maybe is it my favorite book of all time? Well, no, but it opened my eyes to appreciate our Earth better, particularly at this time of climate change. And the sandhill cranes are already here. Why? And there's it's going to be 55, 60 tomorrow. It just seems a little bit like we need to pay more attention to the Earth. So I thought the focus of the book was beautifully presented. Ta-da.
I love that idea of Earth as the main character,
Mhm.
Adele. I think that's beautiful. That's just really beautifully put. Yeah.
Yeah, it's subtly put, but you're right, and I would call the book a love song to Earth, just because of all the descriptions and the lighting of the oceans at dawn, one of the 16 dawns, and and all that, and they all clearly loved Earth because they were separated from it. And I mean, just think of what 9 months and you can't go outside and feel the wind in your hair and hear bird songs. And one of the first things I told Allison when we were getting together a couple decades ago, I said, if I ever went into space, the recording I would take with me, in addition to some music or something, but I would take a recording of the wind in the trees. Just
Yeah, that's
because you
great.
I don't
can't,
know.
you can't hear that up there,
Yeah, that's
You're
absolutely
hearing
great.
the hum of equipment and the whine of machinery and,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thanks. Yeah, that's meaningful.
I don't know who said this at the beginning, but I think they referred to the book as a meditation more than a novel or a story even. And I agree with that. And that's why I would reread it again. I really enjoyed whole passages of it. And I didn't read it all at once. I took my time over several or 2 weeks at least to read it. So, but it did make like I said, a really good impression on me as far as reinforcing some of the things that I had come to believe myself. So I liked it in that sense. In that sense, it was for me more a meditation. It definitely was not a novel or a story that had a gripping plot or something, or even characters. So that's all.
Yeah, I appreciate that even in this slim novel that you could get the sense of people's personalities though. Like I think it was Pietro. They were talking about why couldn't the space station be decorated like a cottage, an English cottage or a French chateau or something. And he's like, I just want to lay on a rug. And somebody said, well, what would you do if you were laying on the rug? And he said, I dream of space. So it's just like he's in space, and yet then he's, people are interesting and complicated. And he may have been the same one that was working with Roman when they were doing the experiments in the petri dishes. And one of them is like, we're holding humanity in our hands, we're holding the future in our hands, and the other one's like, this makes me hungry, or something. So it's just the complexity of people and their perceptions of it. But what about the whole thing with Chia? I believe maybe pronounced the Japanese woman whose mother died. And her having to be so far away and coming to terms with that, and the amazing story about that her mother escaped being killed in Hiroshima because her father was sick, stayed home with her, and just kind of one of those butterfly effect stories, which I find interesting. So I don't know. I thought that even though it's a short story, a short book, she did put personality and individual to each character, I thought. And that the part where I think it was Roman was talking to the woman in Vancouver, and at the end she's like, "My husband died," and he's like, "I'm sorry, I can't hear. We lost connect." That was amazing to me. That was an amazing passage, and
That was my favorite part.
Yeah, it was
I thought
really,
that was really beautiful.
really powerful. I agree. Yeah. Yeah. Mhm. Other comments?
Well, this is Bonnie. I'm going to speak up for a minute to represent the other part of Waukesha County, I guess. Unlike Larry, I had about like this much interest growing up in the space world. I know where I was when they landed on the moon, but other than that, I don't know anything about it. I don't really have much of an interest, and I apologize to Allison, to your husband, for being so ignorant about that world. But again, I want to thank Arcadia Books. I would never have picked up this book to read. It reminded me of reading Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow. I would not have read that book if it wasn't for our book group. So I'm thankful to the bookstore for reading this book. What stood out to me is to me, it was a book about how something so extraordinary, repeated flights up in space and what that's all about. And yet it's really kind of mundane to those folks. And, it was mentioned before about the 16 dawns, and, they look out the window and wow, and how we do that too. And then it's like, okay, here we got to look at the dawn again, for the 14th time or whatever. That really, the mundane to the extraordinary, that's going to stick in my mind about this book. The yin and the yang, wanting what you don't have. And Nancy, tying a little bit into, you were talking about, again, the Japanese woman, and I don't know how to say her name. That personality in particular just struck me, whether the sadness with her mother's death or, I looked online about the cremation and picking the bones. I had no idea that people did that. Caitlin, going back, are you still here? Yeah, going back to what you said, like you, when I read the book, bits here, bit here, bit here, when I'm in bed, a lot of it. But I found myself when I would sit at the table and, sit and read it, then I got to look up, for example, about cremation bones, or, I'd look up different things versus being lazy and laying in bed at 10:30 at night reading. I enjoyed the book. I'm glad I read it. It's really hard to describe, isn't it? To me, it's a hard book. If someone said, "Well, yeah, I heard about that book. What do you think?" I don't know that it's for everybody. Some people more so than other, and it sounds like based on what everyone here is talking about. But thanks, guys, for having it. I'm glad to read something that I wouldn't have otherwise.
Anything else?
Bonnie, I do agree. Like, I liked the book overall. I didn't love it as much as I wanted to, but I think you're exactly right when you talk about the collision of the mundane and the extraordinary in this book. And I think that's where its brilliance is, because it's both, like, that's life in general, as well as like this very extreme example of astronauts being confronted by the beauty of Earth and the beauty of space and the wonder of space, and also just their mundane job. but all of the different stories and little emotional pieces in the book remind you of that it's, daily life is miraculous, but also just perfunctory. And it's like this weird balance of going about your day and then just being smacked in the face by, bird singing or whatever it is that makes you stop and take notice.
Mm-hmm. One other thing I want to add now that you're back, Diane, I apologize. Larry, when you were talking of your feelings about the book, and then Diane, I don't know if you saw your face frozen, but I was just laughing. Because at first I thought you were intentionally doing it. I didn't realize it was frozen. So no disrespect for anyone, but it was the perfect freeze frame. You got to say that.
Well, Karen texted me and said that Karen texted me and said that you thought that maybe I was just so shocked by what Larry said that I left. I think my computer was so shocked that it just shut down. I lost my internet connection.
Diane, you missed me saying how much I love the play Silent Sky that Waukesha Civic Theater did. I thought it was an incredible play. So
well, I'm going to have to watch this recording afterwards to hear what you thought about the book, though.
Where did you see Silent Sky?
Citadel Theater in Lake Forest.
Cool, because I never heard of the play or the woman or anything, and it was just incredibly well written.
Yeah, they did a really, really wonderful production.
Okay. Does anybody have any last thoughts about Orbital?
Yes, I just want to say nobody's touched on the fact that it was a thread throughout the book that these 4 astronauts were going to the moon. And, the different people on the station, were their thoughts about why they wanted to be an astronaut, and now they're just on the space station, but these 4 people are going to the moon. And so that was a thread throughout the book, and I just wanted to bring that up. I guess nobody had mentioned that yet.
And when is is it 2026 that they're hoping to send a moon?
Yeah, I think so. A few years from now, 3-4 years from now, I think is their goal. They may or may not make it, but that's their goal right now.
Well, and the other thing that it's on page 73 of the hardcover book, it talks about he's never sure if man's lust for space is curiosity or ingratitude. If this weird, hot longing makes him a hero or an idiot, undoubtedly something just short of either. The thoughts run into a wall and expire, and then are reborn into a sudden apprehension for the 100th time today of those 4 souls, his colleagues and friends, on their way to the moon. I found places in the book where, commented on the bigger picture and, well, I don't know, kind of meaning of life on Earth, and why are we at some level of, this is my word, obsessed with space when there's really nothing out there to sustain us. We have to make artificial environment to live. Like versus when, we settled this country and went west, and I'm not saying that was all a good thing of how that happened, but people could survive. I mean, out in space, why would you want to go there? You'd have to create this artificial environment just to survive. So, I wouldn't want to go to space.
Okay.
I'm with you, Barbara. I'm staying here on Earth.
In 1985, some friends and I had been waiting 9 years, I think, through a lottery to do private trip through the Grand Canyon. We ended up, there were 14 of us on the trip. We did a 16-day, 4 rafts and 3 kayaks. And I remember the first few nights, I was really the only person I was living in New York at the time. And so I was sort of night person, and everybody else was just bang out on the sand asleep by 9 o'clock at night. And every night you just watch these satellites go over above the canyon. And I remember the first 5 or 6 nights, I just kept sending a thought up saying, if anybody wants to take me up and kind of, you know, have a chat about where you're from, just come get me. I'm just sitting here. I'm awake and everybody else is asleep. And I just sort of thought, God, that would be so fascinating. Of course, it hadn't really occurred to me that you might not get back, but you know, it was, but I mean, I can literally, I mean, remember doing it night after night. I mean, I'm not that, never happened. Oh, well. Okay. Thank you. That was great. That was good. Because, you know, I think a lot of what you guys echoed in your questions about it or were things that a lot of people have questioned. And I think that's great. And it's, but it is, well, the stuff that works in the book really works. And there was, yeah, the last line of Joshua Ferris's review in the New York Times a few months ago. You know, and he liked the book, but you could tell he was struggling with some of the issues that you guys talked about. And his last sentence is, sometimes wonder and beauty suffice. And, you know, and I think in many sections of the book that carries the day. And that's, so I guess that made it enough for me somehow. But thank you all. That was really well
Okay.
argued.
Oh, sorry, James.
No,
I was going to say, now for something completely different. For our March selection, we have chosen Martyr. And you have to say it like that because it has an exclamation point at the end. Martyr by Keva Akbar. So that will be on March 20th at 6 o'clock. So we're going to go into this with all of you because neither James nor I have read it yet, but it's been getting big buzz and reviews.
Yeah, the woman who does a lot of our buying with me loved the book, and 2 of her friends just loved it. And I thought, okay, because it's gotten so much interesting press, and there's a lot going on in the book, that's for sure.
The author did a great interview. It was either on PBS NewsHour or Amanpour and Company, where they followed him at a book signing and kind of told his bio. So it was on one of those PBS shows.
Okay.
This is what it is. A newly sober orphan son of Iranian immigrants, guided by the voice of artists, poets, and kings, embarks on a remarkable search for a family secret that leads him to a terminally ill painter living out her final days in the Brooklyn Museum. Electrifying, funny, and wholly original, Martyr heralds the arrival of an essential new voice in contemporary fiction. And then it gets big blurbs by Tommy Orange and Lauren Groff. So those are some pretty excellent authors themselves. So Martyr. And I don't have one to show you because ours all sold and we haven't gotten our replacements yet. This is what it looks like.
We haven't been buying a lot of books, as you can well understand.
Yeah.
The author again, you said, is Kevin?
No, Keva, K-A-V-E-H, Kava, and Akbar, A-K-B-A-R.
Thank you.
He's mostly well known as a poet. I believe this is his first novel, I think.
I think you're right.
And yeah, maybe I won't say. There's something about the book that's very personal to him. One of the central events in the book, but and it's an event that most of the people who are in this book club are old enough to remember the event when you hear the name of what it is, it'll come back to you. But it's pretty potent stuff. Okay.
All right. Well, thank you, everybody. We will see you on March 20th.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thanks.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.
Bye.
Good night.